There is growing appetite among the Democratic majorities in the state legislature and Governor Kathy Hochul to take steps to further regulate the interactions between federal immigration officials and state and local government agencies in New York, building on an existing patchwork of regulations stemming from executive orders as well as previous court rulings. But what the next steps might look like is still up for debate in Albany, so we wanted to explore this evolving landscape with Assemblymember Karines Reyes, a Bronx Democrat who is the sponsor of the New York for All Act, which limits the use of state and local resources for immigration enforcement. Welcome back to the show, Assemblymember.
Happy to be here.
So before we get into what the governor has put on the table, can you give us sort of a refresher course on the types of activities, both formal and informal, that you're looking to deter with your legislation?
Sure. So New York for All would stop formal and informal collusions and collaborations with ICE. One, it would prohibit state agencies and state employees from asking people about their immigration status unless they need that information to administer a program. It would forbid them from stopping somebody, detaining them, questioning them about their perceived immigration status. It would prohibit 287G agreements, which are formal agreements in which local law enforcement enter in with ICE to provide resources for immigration detention. It would ensure that before somebody is kind of handed over to ICE, that they are provided with their rights so that they understand what their rights are. It protects sensitive locations as well. So it prohibits ICE from entering into non-public governmental spaces, amongst a litany of other things.
So the governor has been asked about this legislation, which is not something she's been willing to embrace, even with her evolution on this issue, moving from only supporting executive action to looking to update state law. And she has argued that this legislation, as currently written, would hinder some meaningful criminal enforcement activity. And I'm curious how you think about this idea that this might hamper law enforcement investigations as opposed to just doing civil types of interference.
Well, I think people are conflating two things, right? I think immigration, an immigration infraction is a civil infraction.
Sure.
It is the equivalent of a parking ticket. Right? And that's why it's so difficult for ICE to be able to get an actual warrant to stop and detain people. And they've been using judicial warrants. They've been using administrative warrants, which is just basically an ICE agent fills out a form. And that, part of New York for All is that the difference between honoring judicial warrants and not honoring just ICE administrative warrants.
And so just to be clear, with New York for All, if this became the law of the land, and let's say there was a undocumented person who was suspected of domestic violence or something like that, and while this wouldn't be the purview of ICE, if for whatever reason there was going to be some sort of collaboration between local law enforcement and federal immigration officials, could they still work together in that circumstance, or would they be forbidden from collaborating whatsoever?
Well, being suspected of committing a crime is not the same as committing a crime.
Sure.
Right.
But we also have warrants handed out for people who are suspected of activities before they're convicted of it.
But if somebody is suspected of committing a crime here, I would think that the general public would like that person to be held accountable, not just picked up and disappeared by ICE and sent back and freed somewhere else, right? Like, I think we want to make sure that there's due process and that people are held accountable for if they commit a crime. But what's happening is not that, criminals are running free and that this is somehow hindering law enforcement from detaining criminals when somebody is committed of a crime. And this, we see this under sanctuary laws under the city of New York. There's all these crimes that would still render somebody deportable, right? And in those instances, law enforcement would still continue to collaborate with ICE. What we don't want is collaboration with ICE just because people are being profiled or just because they suspect somebody to be undocumented. And what we've seen across the country is that it doesn't really matter if you're documented or undocumented. If they think you're undocumented, you're being stopped, detained, questioned, investigated, and robbed of due process. And we just don't think that that's something that we should stand for in New York, and we should do everything possible to make sure that New Yorkers aren't harassed by this rogue agency.
Well, before we move on, let me reintroduce you. For listeners just joining us, this is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're speaking with Assemblymember Karines Reyes, a Bronx Democrat. A criticism I've heard of this bill is that it is casting too large of a net and essentially going to have maybe unintended consequences by preventing working relationships between federal and local officials that might be more positive in nature. So can you talk to the specificity of your proposal in terms of the types of situations that it would allow there to be still some sort of back and forth between federal and local or state officials, if any?
Yeah. I mean, first I would say that if anything is marring the relationship between the state and the feds, it's the feds. Mm-hmm. It's not us, right?
Well, I guess it's saying that this would limit some of the positive opportunities to work between federal and state or local officials. And maybe you think there aren't any possibilities like that now.
Look, I think that in the realm of public safety, the job of local police departments is to focus on public safety. And if we're so concerned about the relationship between state government and federal government, and we're not concerned about the relationships between communities and local police department, like that to me is something that we should be really concerned about, because that is where we will see the unraveling of public safety. If communities feel like the people who are tasked with protecting and serving them are actually helping these other people who are being called law enforcement or whatever, they're coming here and are harassing them and attacking them. If immigrant communities can't come forward and report crimes, if you're just afraid to interact with your local law enforcement, that doesn't make us safer. And I think those will be the relationships that are fraying when we continue to not do anything.
So one of the things that is notable about the governor's proposal, which is, as you mentioned earlier, deals with those so-called 287G agreements between municipalities and federal immigration officials, is that it is dealing with those formalized relationships as opposed to those circumstances that can just pop up in everyday activities. And like one thing I heard about was local law enforcement stopping somebody in a traffic stop and then saying, oh, I need to call someone for translation services. And who do they call for those services?
They call ICE.
ICE.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, is that what you see as primarily the limitation of the governor's proposal, the fact that it only extends to those formal arrangements, or are there other aspects of it that make it not go far enough for you?
Well, the police chief of Allegheny County already said that the 287G agreements banning the 287G agreement wouldn't change anything that they continue to do, because they would continue to collaborate with ICE. And the 287G agreement is just a formality so that they can get reimbursed from the federal government. But it means that they are taking police officers off of regular duty to transport ICE detainees to Batavia, or to set up a perimeter for when ICE is doing their activities. They are using the resources of local law enforcement that are supposed to be focusing on public safety to do the work of ICE. And let's be clear, ICE has the most inflated budget it's ever seen since its inception in the history of the federal government. I mean, it's, $75 billion or some crazy astronomical nonsense like that. They don't need us to be using our state dollars to do that. And even if we were to pass New York for All, ICE can still come in here and do what they do, right? We just would not be helping them or using our resources to help them.
One of the things that I found notable of the governor's proposal is that it has a sunset date on it of 2029, which I have to imagine is a reaction to when Donald Trump is scheduled to leave the White House. Does it make sense to you to have a sunset date based on the idea of who may or may not be in control of the White House? Or is something like the New York for All something you'd like to see adopted permanently because you don't have faith in federal immigration officials and, their ability to work in a productive manner with local officials?
Absolutely. I think these protections should be permanent. I think that they speak to New York values. And if we thought about all of the scenarios in which the federal government and ICE could have abused power, and now we're kind of seeing it play out. I think it just makes sense for us to make sure that those protections are enshrined in the law and they are permanent. And even with like the executive order that the previous governor signed and it was extended by Kathy, like even that had gaps in protections. So absolutely, it should be something that's permanent.
As we speak, I think there is a broad consensus that has been established that the Trump administration's approach to identifying and deporting unlawfully present individuals is wrong. But I'm curious whether you think there is a right way for federal and local officials to work together on this type of issue, or whether you think in no circumstances should local officials ever be utilized to address who is allowed to stay in this country.
That's not the job of local government. That is the job of the federal government, and they have the money to do that work. I mean, the job of local government is to provide services, is to protect New Yorkers, is to, make sure the state is running and that services are being provided. That's not our responsibility. And there will be instances in which there will be overlap and there will be collaboration, within the scope of the law. But what we're seeing play out overwhelmingly is just that they want to use us to do their job.
Well, finally, where do things stand with this in terms of votes behind the scenes? Do you have, say, 76 Assembly Democrats ready to vote for New York for All?
I definitely have 76.
And what's the threshold the Assembly Speaker has set for you?
80.
And so who are you looking for? Who are you talking to?
I'm not putting people on the spot. But some of my colleagues have some concerns and some questions, and I'm happy. And I've been having conversations with them and talking through their questions. I think another thing that has been helpful is that the speaker has put out a poll. Recently, he's done several actually in the past couple of years, and I think one, he does one before we start session during our retreat, and he did another one, and the numbers are definitely moving in our favor. I think just people are in shock and upset and angry and frustrated at what's happening, and they're looking for us to do something.
Are you worried that the New York for All effort is going to be undermined by the governor offering this alternative language that she wants to, quote unquote, fast track? That people who are on the fence can say, sorry, I don't support New York for All because I'm with the governor on this, and that'll either be enough rhetorically or substantively.
I mean, of course, that's a concern, but any of my colleagues who really care about this issue and care about what's happening on the ground need to know that what the governor has proposed so far isn't enough, and it's kind of performative, and it's stuff is going to continue to happen if we don't do a little bit more. We welcome the conversation, and I'm happy that the governor is open to having this conversation. But she also said that she's doing this because the legislature hasn't given her a bill, and I would implore our leadership, including our speaker, to pass New York for All and pass immigration legislation that we can put before her instead of just taking what she's given us. And to be clear, there were other bills that were kind of part of that package, that she kind of picked parts of different pieces of legislation, and I'm sure that those sponsors would prefer the totality of their bills be what's being considered.
Well, we've been speaking with Assemblymember Karines Reyes. She is a Bronx Democrat and sponsor of the New York for All legislation. Assemblymember, thanks so much for visiting us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
If you're enjoying the Capitol Press Room, please consider making a recurring contribution to help make our journalism possible. To show your support, visit capitolpressroom.org/donate.